Okay, for our last painting technique we're going to look at is rag rolling. All right. For this, what I've done is I've started off by, in our last little segment of our paper, I've taped it off and I've just done a quick wet scumble. It's the same sort of technique I did at the beginning with this scumble here, but I added more water to my mix, so it's a little softer. All right, so this is kind of showing you how, the difference between a scumble that's soft versus the very chunky, brushy scumble we did early on. So this I'm using as my base, and we're going to apply a second technique on top. What you also might notice is I'm using some plastic gloves just to keep the paint off my hands. If you're working with paint a lot, especially with your hands, you end up have to clean your hands a lot, so your fingernails a lot. So I chose to wear some plastic gloves. I've also mixed up some of the medium with a color. I went ahead with, again, the burnt umber, which I guess I'm a fan of today, and I'm going to use that as my rag rolling. Now this is sort of, I mix the consistency of a very thin lotion, right? So as I move this through my hands, you see it's almost like oil, like motor oil. Okay, so that's the consistency I kind of want with this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take either a rag or a paper towel or tissue paper. It doesn't really matter, but what I want to do is I want to crumble it up. I want it to have lots of little nooks and crannies and little folds and all this kind of business. And I'm going to take it and I'm going to dip it and kind of roll it inside of my paint here. All right, I'm going to get it fairly saturated. I don't want it to be a mess, but get it on there pretty good. Okay, and then what you can do, kind of manipulating your hand a little bit, start on one end of your page and just start rolling it. As you roll, you'll get all these interesting little rocky looking textures all over what you've already done. And it very quickly, it becomes a very interesting looking technique. You can't really paint this, I guess you could, but what's nice about it is very irregular. It's very almost, and if you want to, you can kind of go back over areas. If you don't like something, go a little bit, you don't have to go all the way across. Use the same technique to kind of touch up areas that you're not happy with. You can go in different directions so that it's not so regular if there's something. And you'll get these neat little patterns and little splotches, right? So you can do one pass if you like. You could do two passes, maybe two different colors, and you end up, but what is nice is if you do any sort of a scumble or a wet blend underneath, you'll get a really interesting variation in color in your whole piece, and it changes very quickly. Now, this technique, I wouldn't do a whole set with. It is time consuming, but I might do it on an area like a large prop, maybe a rock. If we have a shop built boulder or something to that effect, maybe a smaller piece, then I can create quick textures on it that look very natural. But to do an entire floor like this, or to do an entire wall like this, this is time consuming and typically a lot of wear on your body. So I don't recommend that. So what I'd like you to do is kind of look around to see if you can find an image of rock or any other kind of natural, or even something like plaster. Plaster has the same sort of pattern. The difference is plaster is in different shades of whites and cream colors. We wouldn't have all this saturated color. We'd have more creams and whites and more neutral white colors. And then the same kind of technique, you would get something that looked very much like troweled on plaster. You could get a similar technique if you use different reds and browns to get almost a brick texture. The only thing you would need to do is then to do out the outlines of all the different grout patterns, but you can rag roll on a very convincing brick texture with browns and red browns. So Try to see if you can find something, a texture in nature or in architecture stuff that has this same kind of rag rolly type of texture. Try to come up and try to decipher the different colors, mix them, and apply them onto your sample board, okay, for submission. So try to see if you can do that, and let's see what you come up with. All right. This concludes our first week of painting techniques. I hope you found it fun. We've talked about the scumbling, we've talked about stippling, we've talked about dry brushing, and we've talked about now rag rolling. So play around with all those and submit them when you're finished, and then we'll move on to our final project.